The most dangerous mistake you can make is believing a person's uniform tells you the size of their soul. The words echoed through Nathan Carter's mind long after the night was over, but when he first stepped into Lauron House, Manhattan's most exclusive fine dining restaurant, he believed exactly the opposite. Rain streaked across the towering glass windows while the city shimmered beneath thousands of white lights. Crystal chandeliers reflected softly against polished marble floors. Expensive watches caught the glow of candlelight. Quiet conversations floated between tables where billion-dollar negotiations often sounded no louder than casual dinner plans. Nathan walked in as if the room belonged to him. At 39, he had built one of America's fastest-growing technology companies, and success had taught him a dangerous lesson. Every room eventually adjusted itself around his presence. Managers straightened their jackets. Investors stood to shake his hand. Employees watched every word that left his mouth. Respect had become so automatic that he rarely questioned whether it was earned or simply purchased. "Your usual table, Mr. Carter," the hostess said with a practiced smile. Nathan barely nodded before removing his tailored charcoal overcoat and checking the Swiss watch on his wrist. His executive team would arrive within minutes. Tonight's dinner was supposed to celebrate another acquisition worth nearly $500 million. Everything was running on schedule except one small inconvenience. His coffee had not yet arrived. Across the dining room, Claire Bennett balanced two trays with effortless precision. 27 years old, dressed in the restaurant's simple black uniform, she moved quietly between tables without ever rushing. She smiled politely when customers spoke, listened more than she talked, and somehow carried herself with a calm confidence that didn't belong to someone working double shifts. Most people never noticed her. Nathan certainly didn't. To him, she was simply another waitress doing another ordinary job. "Table 12, the floor manager whispered. "That's Mr. Carter." Claire nodded once and picked up a fresh cup of dark roast coffee. Steam curled gently into the air as she approached the table. "Good evening, sir," she said warmly. "Would you like cream, or do you prefer it black?" Nathan never looked up from the financial report glowing on his phone. "If you have to ask, you're already slowing me down." Claire remained still for only a heartbeat before placing the cup carefully beside him. "Black it is." Her voice never changed. No irritation. No embarrassment. Only professionalism. Nathan finally lifted his eyes. For a brief second he noticed something unexpected. She wasn't intimidated. She wasn't defensive either. She simply looked at him the way someone might observe an approaching storm, with patience instead of fear. That unsettled him more than he cared to admit. Around them, executives began filling nearby tables. His own board members entered the restaurant laughing loudly about stock prices and private jets. Nathan leaned back in his chair, feeling the familiar confidence return. Tonight, everyone important was here. Everyone who mattered. Claire turned to leave. "Excuse me," Nathan called loudly enough for several nearby guests to hear. She stopped and faced him again. "Yes, sir?" A faint smile crossed Nathan's face. It was the kind of smile that usually came before someone else became the punchline. "Tell me something," he said. "Have you ever wondered what it feels like to do work that actually changes the world?" Conversations nearby began to fade as a few curious diners looked toward their table. Claire stood perfectly still. The coffee continued sending thin ribbons of steam into the quiet Manhattan evening. Then she met Nathan's eyes, and for the first time in years, someone looked at him without admiration, without resentment, and without fear. Just quiet understanding. Claire did not answer immediately. The silence lasted only a few seconds, yet it felt long enough for every nearby conversation to disappear beneath the soft music drifting through the restaurant. She gently folded her hands in front of her apron and offered the same calm smile she had given every customer that evening. "I believe every honest job changes someone's world, sir," she said quietly. "Some people build companies. Some people serve meals to families celebrating the happiest nights of their lives. Both matter to the people who receive them." Nathan let out a short laugh, confident that the room would laugh with him. Several executives at neighboring tables exchanged amused glances, while one member of his board smirked behind a crystal water glass. Nathan leaned back comfortably. That sounds inspiring, he replied. But inspiration does not create innovation. It does not create jobs. It does not move markets. Claire nodded politely, never breaking eye contact. Perhaps not. But respect costs nothing, and it has saved more relationships than money ever has. The words landed softly, almost too softly to notice, yet something shifted in the room. The laughter faded before it could fully spread. Even the pianist near the entrance seemed louder than the conversations that followed. Nathan looked at her more carefully than before. Her expression held no anger, no sarcasm, and certainly no attempt to embarrass him. She simply believed what she had said. That unsettled him in a way criticism never had. Before he could answer, his executive team finally approached the table. 6 men and women in tailored suits greeted him enthusiastically, discussing quarterly earnings, international expansion, and tomorrow morning's shareholder meeting. Nathan welcomed the familiar rhythm of business. Numbers made sense. Markets followed patterns. Success rewarded confidence. People, however, were becoming increasingly unpredictable. Claire quietly excused herself and continued serving other guests. She refilled glasses before anyone asked. She remembered names without checking reservations. She noticed when an elderly couple needed extra time reading the menu and when a nervous young man rehearsed a proposal hidden inside his jacket pocket. Every table seemed to receive the same patient attention regardless of the size of the bill. Nathan found himself watching her between conversations. It annoyed him that she appeared completely unaffected by their exchange. Most people either tried to impress him or avoided him afterward. Claire did neither. She simply continued doing her work as though his opinion had no power over the way she saw herself. Nathan. His chief financial officer interrupted his thoughts. Are you listening? Nathan blinked. Of course. We were discussing the leadership summit next month. Nathan answered automatically, but his concentration drifted again toward the dining room. Claire was helping a little boy choose a dessert after patiently explaining every option. The child laughed, and Claire laughed with him, genuine and effortless. There was no performance in her kindness. It looked exactly the same whether she was speaking to a billionaire, a family of 4, or a busboy carrying clean dishes back to the kitchen. Nathan frowned almost imperceptibly. Success had taught him to measure people by ambition, influence, and measurable results. Yet the woman he had dismissed only minutes earlier carried herself with a confidence that seemed untouched by titles or wealth. For reasons he could not explain, the question she never asked lingered in his mind. If respect truly cost nothing, why had it suddenly become the most expensive thing in the room? The dinner continued, but Nathan no longer heard every word spoken around the table. Charts appeared on tablet screens. Revenue projections passed from one executive to another. Someone praised the latest acquisition. Another suggested expanding into 3 additional states before the end of the fiscal year. Normally Nathan would have challenged every assumption, corrected every weak forecast, and dominated the discussion. Tonight his attention drifted across the dining room with surprising frequency. Claire never seemed to stop moving. She carried plates with steady hands, answered questions with quiet confidence, and treated every guest with exactly the same courtesy. A retired couple celebrating their 50th anniversary received the same sincere smile as a venture capitalist ordering an expensive bottle of wine. She thanked the dishwasher who held open the kitchen door just as warmly as she thanked a customer leaving a generous tip. Nathan had spent years studying leadership seminars, corporate psychology, and negotiation strategies, yet he could not remember the last time he had seen someone earn respect without asking for it. The thought irritated him. There had to be an explanation. Perhaps she was simply putting on a performance because wealthy customers were watching. That would make sense. Everyone performed when something valuable was at stake. He had built an empire by recognizing hidden motivations, and he had rarely been wrong. He leaned toward his chief operating officer. "Watch our waitress for a moment," he said quietly. "What do you notice?" The executive glanced across the room before shrugging. "Professional. Efficient. She probably deserves a raise." Nathan shook his head. "Everyone has a breaking point. Everyone changes when the right incentive appears. His colleagues exchanged curious looks. They had seen this side of Nathan before. He enjoyed turning ordinary conversations into demonstrations of human behavior. "You think she is different?" one board member asked. Nathan smiled confidently. "I think people tell you who they are the moment they believe there is something to gain." A server arrived with the next course, but Nathan politely waved him away. "Could you ask Claire to come over for a moment?" A few minutes later, she approached with the same composed expression. "Is everything satisfactory with your dinner, sir?" Nathan folded his hands on the table. "Actually, I have a different request." Claire waited patiently. "I would like to offer you an opportunity." She listened without interrupting. Nathan removed a crisp $100 bill from his wallet and placed it beside his untouched coffee cup. "This is yours if you sit down for 5 minutes and tell my executives what success means to you." The table grew unusually quiet. Several board members shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. It sounded less like a conversation and more like an experiment. Claire looked at the bill for only an instant before returning her eyes to Nathan. Her expression did not brighten. She did not hesitate. She did not appear offended either. Instead, she glanced toward another table where a family was waiting for dessert menus. "Thank you for the offer," she said gently. "But they have been waiting longer than you have." She turned slightly, intending to continue her work, but Nathan spoke again. "It is only 5 minutes." Claire stopped once more. "Time is valuable, Mr. Carter." Nathan nodded toward the bill. "Exactly." A faint smile touched Claire's face, almost too subtle to notice. "That is where we disagree," she replied softly. "Money measures what something costs. Time measures what a person chooses to honor." Those few words settled over the table with unexpected weight, and for the second time that evening, Nathan Carter found himself without an immediate reply. For several long seconds, no one at the table spoke. The executives who had spent years watching Nathan Carter control every negotiation suddenly found themselves studying their menus instead of their chief executive. Claire had not challenged him. She had not embarrassed him. She had simply answered with the quiet certainty of someone who had already settled the argument within herself long before it was ever spoken aloud. Nathan broke the silence with a polite smile that felt more forced than natural. "Interesting philosophy," he said. "Although philosophy does not pay the bills." Claire nodded respectfully. "No, sir. But character often determines how those bills are earned." She offered a courteous smile before excusing herself to serve another table. Nathan watched her disappear into the rhythm of the restaurant. Something about her composure continued to bother him. He was accustomed to reactions: surprise, gratitude, discomfort, excitement, fear. Every conversation produced a predictable outcome because people usually adjusted themselves around wealth and influence. Claire never seemed interested in doing that. His chief operating officer leaned closer. "Nathan, let it go. She is just doing her job." Nathan slowly swirled the untouched coffee in his cup. "Exactly," he replied. "And I want to know whether she believes those words only because they sound noble, or because she actually lives by them." Across the dining room, Claire helped another server carry several heavy dinner plates without being asked. She noticed an elderly gentleman struggling to read the dessert menu and quietly brought him a larger printed copy. When a young busboy accidentally dropped a spoon near the kitchen entrance, she bent down first, picked it up, smiled, and whispered something that made the nervous teenager laugh instead of panic. Nathan noticed every small moment. None of them appeared rehearsed. His curiosity slowly transformed into determination. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed a sleek black business card embossed with silver lettering. On the back, he wrote a number with an expensive fountain pen before signaling the restaurant manager. "Would you please give this to your waitress after her shift?" The manager accepted the card with both hands. "Certainly, Mr. Carter." Nathan continued, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Tell her I am offering an interview at Carter Technologies. Starting salary $150,000 a year. Better hours. Better benefits. A future that actually matches her intelligence. Several executives nodded approvingly. It sounded generous. Even neighboring diners glanced toward the manager with expressions of admiration. A career-changing opportunity from one of the country's most successful chief executives was the kind of story people talked about for years. The manager hurried toward Claire with visible excitement. He spoke quietly before handing her the card. She listened respectfully, thanked him, and looked down at the elegant lettering for only a few moments. Nathan watched closely, certain he already knew how this story would end. Anyone would accept. Few people walked away from an opportunity like that. Claire folded the card carefully instead of slipping it into her pocket. Then she walked back toward Nathan's table. Every executive stopped talking. The soft piano continued filling the room while rain traced gentle lines across the tall windows overlooking Manhattan. Claire placed the business card beside Nathan's coffee without sliding it across the table or making a dramatic gesture. "Thank you for believing I am capable of more," she said sincerely. "That is a compliment I will remember." Nathan smiled confidently. "Then we have an agreement." Claire's gentle expression never changed. "No, sir," she answered. "We have gratitude. An agreement requires that both people want the same destination, and I have not reached the end of mine yet." Nathan stared at the card resting untouched beside his cup, and for the first time in many years, a simple refusal felt heavier than any business deal he had ever lost. The business card remained on the table long after Claire walked away. Nathan stared at it as though it belonged to someone else. No one had ever declined an opportunity from Carter Technologies without asking for more details, a higher salary, or additional benefits. Yet Claire had returned the offer with genuine appreciation instead of excitement. She had accepted the respect but refused the reward. That distinction lingered in Nathan's thoughts far more than he wanted to admit. Around the table, conversation slowly resumed, but it carried a different energy now. One board member finally broke the silence. She turned down $150,000 a year. Another executive shook his head. Either she is extraordinarily confident or she is making the biggest mistake of her life. Nathan remained quiet. For the first time that evening, he was not certain which answer was correct. Across the restaurant, Claire continued her shift exactly as before. She greeted arriving guests with the same warm smile. She cleared empty plates without rushing. She thanked the kitchen staff every time they handed her another order. There was no trace of triumph in her expression, no satisfaction from refusing a wealthy executive in front of an audience. If anything, she seemed relieved that the conversation had ended so she could return to serving people who simply wanted to enjoy their evening. Nathan noticed something else that had escaped him earlier. Every employee seemed genuinely happy when Claire was nearby. The hostess laughed at one of her quiet jokes. A line cook stepped out of the kitchen just long enough to ask whether she had eaten dinner yet. Even the restaurant manager, despite overseeing dozens of employees, thanked Claire personally after she calmly solved a reservation mix-up before it became a complaint. Respect flowed naturally toward her. Nobody appeared required to give it. Nathan suddenly realized that influence did not always come from authority. Sometimes it came from consistency. As dessert arrived at his table, an elderly gentleman from across the room slowly approached with the help of a polished wooden cane. Nathan recognized him immediately. It was Harold Whitmore, a retired federal judge whose reputation for fairness had earned admiration across New York for decades. Harold stopped beside Nathan's table, exchanged a brief greeting, then looked toward Claire with a warm smile. "Young lady," he called gently. "Would you come here for a moment?" Claire walked over. "Good evening, Judge Whitmore. Is everything all right?" The elderly man smiled kindly. "Better than all right. I simply wanted to thank you again." Nathan listened carefully. Harold continued, 3 years ago, after my wife passed away, this restaurant was the first place I visited alone. I remember sitting in that very corner wondering whether life would ever feel normal again. You were the only person who noticed I did not need conversation. I only needed kindness without pity. You treated me like every other guest, and somehow that made the hardest season of my life a little lighter. Claire lowered her eyes modestly. "I am glad you came back." Harold nodded. "I kept coming back because of that." He smiled before returning to his table. Nathan watched the exchange without speaking. No promotion. No title. No recognition from the media. Yet one simple act of quiet dignity had remained in another person's memory for 3 years. Nathan slowly looked at the untouched business card still resting beside his coffee cup, and for the first time in his remarkable career, he began to wonder whether he had spent his entire life measuring success with the wrong scale. By the time the evening came to an end, the rain had finally stopped, leaving Manhattan wrapped in reflections of streetlights and quiet ambition. Nathan stepped outside Lauron House with his executive team, but the usual excitement after a successful business dinner was missing. Limousines waited along the curb. Drivers opened polished black doors. His colleagues continued discussing stock prices and future investments, yet Nathan responded only with brief nods. His attention remained inside the restaurant long after he had walked away from it. During the ride home, the city passed beyond the tinted windows in a blur of glowing towers and late-night traffic. Nathan loosened his tie and replayed every conversation with Claire in his mind. He searched for arrogance in her words and found none. He searched for hidden ambition and found none. Most of all, he searched for contradiction and could not find that either. It was unfamiliar territory. He had spent decades believing that every decision could be explained by personal gain, but Claire had quietly ignored opportunities that many people would have considered life-changing. The following morning, before the first executive meeting of the day, Nathan walked into his office overlooking Central Park. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed one of the most valuable views in New York, yet he barely noticed it. Instead, he pressed the intercom. "Emily, could you come in for a moment?" His executive assistant entered carrying a digital tablet. "Good morning, Nathan." He looked up from his desk. "I need a favor." Emily smiled politely. "Of course." Nathan hesitated for only a second. "Find out everything you can about Claire Bennett, the waitress from Lauron House." Emily looked surprised. "Are we recruiting her?" Nathan slowly shook his head. "I am not sure." She nodded professionally. "I will see what public information is available." By early afternoon, a modest digital file appeared on Nathan's desk. It was unexpectedly thin. No social media filled with carefully crafted personal branding. No interviews. No awards. No attempts to become visible. Just a handful of public records. Claire Bennett. Bachelor's degree in Communication and Ethics from Georgetown University with academic honors. Several years earlier she had accepted a position at a respected non-profit organization focused on community mediation and conflict resolution. Then, almost without explanation, her professional record ended. After that came only payroll information from Lauron House. Nathan frowned. It made no sense. Someone with that education and background could have pursued consulting, law, corporate leadership, or public policy. Instead, she had remained a waitress for years. There had to be a reason. Before he could think further, Emily knocked lightly on the open office door once again. "There is one more thing," she said. "I spoke with someone who knows the restaurant manager." Nathan looked up immediately. "And?" Emily answered carefully. "Apparently Claire has turned down several job offers over the past few years. Not just yours." Nathan leaned back slowly. "Several. Yes. One was from a law firm. Another came from a consulting company. A third offered nearly twice what she currently earns." Nathan stared across the skyline, silent. "Did anyone say why she stayed?" Emily shook her head. "No one seems to know. They only said she always smiles, thanks people for the opportunity, and politely says she is exactly where she needs to be." The office fell completely quiet. Nathan looked out across the endless city below, where millions of people woke every morning chasing the next promotion, the next title, or the next paycheck. Yet somewhere among them was a woman who had repeatedly walked away from all three, and for the first time in his career, Nathan Carter realized he was no longer trying to understand her choices. He was beginning to question his own. The questions followed Nathan everywhere during the next several days. They appeared in the quiet moments between board meetings, during elevator rides, and even while reviewing quarterly reports that normally demanded his complete attention. He had spent years believing that certainty was the greatest advantage a leader could possess, yet now uncertainty refused to leave him. Then, on a grey Tuesday morning, certainty disappeared from the entire company. Emily entered his office without her usual composed smile. "Nathan, we have a situation." One glance at her expression was enough. "Tell me." She placed a tablet on his desk displaying headlines that were already spreading across financial news websites. A former supplier had publicly accused Carter Technologies of abandoning long-standing community commitments after a restructuring project. The claims were exaggerated, but they contained just enough truth to raise difficult questions. Investors wanted answers. Employees were confused. Reporters were requesting interviews. Within an hour, the executive conference room filled with senior leadership. Charts covered the large display screens. Attorneys reviewed carefully worded statements. Public relations consultants suggested aggressive responses designed to protect the company's image. Every proposal focused on winning the argument. None addressed the growing disappointment visible among employees and customers. Nathan listened for nearly 2 hours. Each recommendation sounded polished, expensive, and strategically calculated. Yet something felt strangely familiar. Everyone was measuring the problem the same way he always had. Through numbers. Through legal language. Through reputation management. Finally he closed his notebook. "None of this feels right." The room fell silent. One consultant replied carefully, "Our responsibility is to protect the company." Nathan slowly nodded. "Perhaps. But what if protecting the company and protecting trust are not the same thing?" No one answered. That afternoon, unable to quiet his thoughts, Nathan left the office earlier than usual. Instead of returning home, he found himself walking through familiar Manhattan streets until the warm lights of Lauron House appeared ahead. He had not planned the visit. His feet had simply carried him there. The restaurant was quieter than before. Claire was arranging fresh flowers near the entrance when she noticed him. There was no surprise on her face, only the same calm welcome she offered every guest. "Good evening, Mr. Carter." Nathan managed a small smile. "I hope I am not interrupting." "Not at all." She led him to a quiet table near the window. For several moments neither of them spoke. Finally Nathan admitted something that would have been impossible only a week earlier. "My company has a serious problem." Claire listened without asking unnecessary questions. "Everyone around me is trying to protect our reputation," Nathan continued. "Yet somehow the more advice I receive, the less certain I become." Claire placed a glass of water on the table before answering. "May I ask you one question?" Nathan nodded. "When people stop trusting a person, what do they usually want first?" Nathan considered several possibilities before quietly replying, "Proof." Claire smiled gently. "Sometimes. But more often they want honesty before they are ready to believe the proof." Nathan remained silent. Claire continued, "People usually forgive mistakes more quickly than they forgive feeling ignored. If someone believes you understand their disappointment, they become willing to hear your explanation. If they believe you only want to defend yourself, every explanation sounds like another excuse." Nathan looked out through the rain-speckled window as pedestrians hurried beneath umbrellas. Her words were remarkably simple. No complicated strategy. No expensive consultant. Just an understanding of people that seemed almost obvious once it had been spoken aloud. For the second time since they met, the answer he had been searching for arrived from the one person he had been least prepared to learn from. The next morning, Nathan cancelled the prepared statement his communications team had spent all night refining. The decision stunned everyone in the executive conference room. Attorneys exchanged uncertain glances. Public relations consultants quietly closed their laptops. One vice president finally spoke. "Nathan, this approach carries unnecessary risk." Nathan looked around the room with unusual calm. So does pretending people only care about legal language? He stood and walked toward the large window overlooking the city. "We are not going to argue with our customers. We are going to listen to them." The room became completely still. It was not the decision they had expected from the man who had built his reputation on precision and relentless confidence. That afternoon, instead of broadcasting a carefully polished corporate response, Nathan appeared in a simple recorded message from his office. There were no dramatic graphics, no expensive production, and no defensive tone. He acknowledged that recent business decisions had caused disappointment for some communities and admitted that the company had focused too heavily on operational efficiency while failing to communicate with the people affected. He promised to meet directly with employees, local leaders, and long-time partners before announcing any additional changes. He did not promise perfection. He promised attention. The reaction surprised nearly everyone. Financial analysts expected criticism but instead found conversations shifting in a different direction. Employees shared the message internally because it sounded sincere rather than rehearsed. Community representatives accepted invitations to speak with company leadership instead of exchanging accusations through headlines. Trust did not return overnight, but the anger began to soften because people finally believed they were being heard. Several days later, the board gathered once again. Revenue forecasts remained stable. Investor confidence had begun recovering. One director leaned back in his chair and smiled. "I have to admit it, Nathan. That was not the strategy one expected." Another added, "Neither did any of our consultants." Nathan allowed himself a quiet smile. "It was not my strategy." The executives looked at him with curiosity, but he offered no further explanation. That evening, after work, Nathan returned to Laurent House carrying nothing except a small envelope. The restaurant was busy, filled with familiar conversations and the comforting sound of glasses meeting polished tables. Claire noticed him almost immediately. "Welcome back, Mr. Carter." Her voice carried the same warmth it always had. Nathan smiled, but this time there was no trace of superiority behind it. "May I speak with you when you have a free moment?" "Of course." A few minutes later, she joined him near the entrance between arriving guests. Nathan held the envelope in both hands before offering it to her. "This is not another job offer." Claire accepted it with quiet curiosity but did not open it. Nathan took a slow breath. Inside is a handwritten note. He paused before continuing. "The first night we met, I believed success gave me the right to measure another person's worth. I was wrong." Claire listened without interrupting. "You answered every careless remark with dignity instead of resentment. You taught me something that no boardroom, no business school, and no leadership seminar ever did." Nathan lowered his eyes for a brief moment before meeting hers again. "I came here tonight because an apology should never be delayed by pride." Claire remained silent for a few thoughtful seconds. Then a gentle smile appeared. "Thank you for saying that." Nathan nodded. "I should have said it much sooner." Claire carefully held the unopened envelope against her apron. "The strongest people are not the ones who never make mistakes," she said softly. "They are the ones who are willing to become different after they recognize them." Nathan realized that, for the first time since entering the restaurant weeks earlier, he no longer felt the need to win the conversation. He simply felt grateful to be part of it. Autumn slowly settled over New York, and with it came the quiet rhythm of ordinary days. Carter Technologies moved forward with renewed purpose, not because every challenge had disappeared, but because its leadership had begun listening before speaking. Employees noticed the difference first. Department meetings became conversations instead of announcements. Community partnerships were rebuilt one relationship at a time. Investors appreciated the stability, but Nathan valued something else far more. For the first time in many years, people spoke honestly in his presence instead of simply agreeing with him. It was a change no financial report could measure. Several weeks later, Nathan returned once again to Laurent House, not as a celebrated chief executive, but simply as another guest. The hostess greeted him with a familiar smile and led him to a quiet table near the window where rain had once traced silver lines across the glass. Claire was finishing another evening shift. Nothing about her seemed different. She still moved through the dining room with steady grace. She still remembered regular customers by name. She still thanked every coworker before leaving the kitchen. Watching her, Nathan finally understood what had puzzled him from the beginning. She had never needed the room to recognize her value because she had already recognized it herself. As he prepared to leave, Claire walked over carrying his receipt. Nathan glanced at the total before reaching for his wallet. This time he did not leave an extravagant tip to prove generosity. Instead, he wrote a short sentence on the back of the receipt before folding it neatly beneath the empty coffee cup. Claire noticed the note only after he had quietly stepped outside into the cool evening air. She unfolded the paper and read the handwritten words. "Thank you for reminding me that success is measured by the lives we honor, not the titles we collect." She smiled softly, folded the receipt, and slipped it into the pocket of her apron. It joined a few other small memories that mattered for reasons money could never explain. Outside, Nathan paused on the sidewalk before looking back through the restaurant window. Claire was already welcoming another guest with the same warmth she had shown everyone else. She had not become an executive. She had not accepted a prestigious position. She had not changed careers to prove anything to the world. She simply continued living according to the values that had quietly transformed someone else's life. Nathan smiled to himself before walking into the evening crowd, no longer seeing strangers as job titles, uniforms, or social status. He wondered how many remarkable stories passed him every day wearing ordinary clothes. The city around him remained as busy as ever, filled with ambition, deadlines, and endless destinations, but everything looked different because he was looking with different eyes. Somewhere behind him, another cup of coffee was being served, another family was being welcomed, another small act of kindness was unfolding without applause or recognition. Most people would never hear those stories, yet they would still change lives in ways that no headline could capture. Sometimes the strongest voice in a crowded room belongs to the person who never raises it. Sometimes the greatest lesson arrives from someone the world barely notices. And sometimes the difference between arrogance and wisdom is nothing more than the courage to admit that another human being has something priceless to teach you. Because in the end, uniforms fade, titles change, fortunes rise and fall, but the quiet dignity with which a person treats others leaves an impression that time itself rarely erases.